Hello and welcome to Easy Projects. So I'm about to build my new computer here, and I thought I might as well share it with you guys, because I've heard a lot of people are scared of building computers and handling hardware, so I hope that I could prove that it is actually not that difficult. So let's take a look at it. So every computer needs a processor, and I chose the Intel Core i7-7490K, which came out recently. And for that we'll need a motherboard. That is the Asus Maximus 7 Hero. We have some RAM, and that is the Corsair Vengeance Pro 2400 MHz. And we have a graphics card. That is a Gigabyte GTX 770. We have a Crucial SSD, a Corsair power supply 750 watts. And this is an 80 plus gold rated power supply, so it's pretty efficient, and it is modular, so you can plug in the cables that you need. You have one fixed cable, the 24 pin and the 8 pin cable, but you always need that, so I don't see that as a problem. We have an Arctic cooling freezer i30 to cool the CPU, because if you compare the size of the box cooler, as you can see, there's really no competition, and this cooler in here is only just sufficient to cool it at stock clock speed, so I decided to go with something a little bigger. I have very good experience with these heat pipe type CPU coolers. In this case, really don't have any room for water cooling, not even those. You get those closed loop dedicated CPU coolers from like Cooler Master and Corsair, but the radiator can't really fit in there. You can fit a single 120mm in there, but then it will be just as good with one of these. Some thermal paste, and of course we'll need a case. That is the Zalman C3 Plus, and this is actually the cheapest case that I could find that looked decent. So it is all plastic except for the side panels on the front, and it has its limitations, so it's not the best case, but it is very cheap. And we also have an SP120 Quiet Edition fan from Corsair. And the graphics card came with a copy of Watch Dogs, so couldn't complain there. So let's get all this stuff out of the way, and let's start by taking a look at the motherboard. So the first thing I like to do is to get the CPU installed in the motherboard. And before you unpack all the hardware and everything, make sure that you do it in a room without carpets on the floor, and I won't really recommend you to do it on a plastic table, because you want to avoid static electricity that can actually damage the components. I have never damaged anything by doing it in the living room, but now that I got this electronics workshop, I might as well just use the anti-static workstation. And also, if you are extremely paranoid, you can use an anti-static wrist strap like this. Just put it around your arm and plug it into main earth. So let's get the motherboard out of the box. And I was actually a little surprised when I opened this. It's not in an anti-static bag like motherboards used to come in. But it does have this anti-static plastic on the bottom though. It is just a single layer. So it is probably just for the aesthetics, so you can actually see the motherboard through the box. And we of course get an I/O shield. We'll need that later. And there's some cables that we probably won't use, because I would like to keep my cables red in this computer. There's some handy adapters for the pin headers, where you connect the LEDs and the power buttons and so on. But we will get back to those. And we want to get our processor as well. There are some instructions and warranty and stuff, I guess, that you probably want to read. We have the Intel box cooler, and this is a joke, really. It is. Just a second, let me get my old one. That came with my LGA 1366 socket CPU. And here it is so that you can compare it. This is the new one, and this is the one that came with my old CPU. Well, my Core i7-920 was capable of dissipating more power, but then again, this wasn't enough to keep that one cool, and this new one will still put out 80 watts. I can't remember the exact figure for the old one, but it was over 100 watts. But still, don't use this really, it's garbage. So, this is the thing that we are actually interested in. So I guess the problem most people have when it comes to assembling computers is actually handling the CPU and installing it in the motherboard. That is also the most dangerous part, if you can say. But the only fragile thing about the CPU is actually electrostatic discharge. So the only thing you don't want to do is actually touch it on the bottom side here. Will of course go like this. And apart from that, it is just one solid unit, and you can't really break anything just by handling it. Well, you shouldn't rub it, that is probably the worst thing you could do. So we want to go ahead and lift this lever arm on the motherboard and lift the cover. Well, I was about to say something, but then I realized it's actually not on this motherboard, but usually you can see here on the processor there's this little arrow, and there will be in most cases a matching arrow on the motherboard, but for some reason Asus didn't put it on this motherboard. But for the LGA 1150 socket you can always tell how the CPU should go in by looking at these two notches. And there are two notches on the socket on the motherboard as well, and as long as they line up you can't pretty much do anything wrong. And again, hold the CPU by the sides and don't touch the bottom. And just gently line up the notches and place it down in the motherboard socket. And when you got it right, you shouldn't be able to move this more than a few tenths of a millimeter. And when you place the CPU in the socket, just pop out this plastic cover and close down the lid. Make sure this locking assembly makes it together, and just press down on the lever and lock it in place. That's it. And make sure to keep this cover if you should ever take out your processor. It is very important that you protect the pins in the socket. If just one of them gets bent, well, then you can throw out the whole motherboard if you can't straighten the pin again, and it's not that easy. Let's get the left side panel off the case. And just get all the goodies out of it. So the Zalman C3 Plus case comes with this vertical bar here that you can attach all kind of stuff to, but I just want to remove this, at least while we're installing the motherboard and power supply and stuff like that. I also want to move this fan to the front and install this Corsair SP120 in the back, because it looks prettier. So I removed the fan and will install it in the front later. Next you want to put the I/O shield in place and just check the orientation with the motherboard. So Zalman already installed some of these motherboard standoffs in the case. And your case and your motherboard might be different, so you want to check your manual for your motherboard to see where you have to place these standoffs. In my case it just so happens that I have to put in 3 more of these standoffs out in the right side here. So, now we are ready to install the motherboard. And it should be pretty easy if there's no cables in the way. Come on. So what you want to do is be careful not to scratch the bottom of the motherboard with the standoffs here. Just simply line up all the connectors with the I/O shield and just lift it a little bit on the right side while you do this. Just put it down. And your case should come with the screws as well. And they will look something like this. Just make sure that the threads fit with the standoff. And when you have got a screw in every hole, just tighten them up. And be gentle, not too hard, you know. So now will be a good time to put in your RAM. And it doesn't really matter which slots you put them into, as long as you use two of the same color. If you have 2 sticks of RAM, if you have 4, well, then you're going to use all 4 slots. But the thing about dual channel RAM is that they work in pairs, so well, you can put one in the black and one in the red, but they will not run at their highest speed. So you kind of have to put them in either both the blacks or both the reds. So I'll take the reds because they are furthest away from the CPU, and the cooler that I'm going to put in there is quite big, so I want to make sure that there's room for that. And just line up this little notch with the notch on the motherboard, and they will only fit in one way. And just open the clips. On this motherboard there's only clips on one side, but on yours there might be on both sides. And these cables are really in the way, they're pretty annoying. Yeah, well, why didn't I put them in there in the first place? We will need to get the SSD in there, so let's just do that now. And for some strange reason they have made it so it can only go in upside down, so we can't get the nice side to face us. We'll have to look at this. We will also need to plug in some cables, and that will be much easier if we pull off the back panel. So I probably should have done this to begin with, but I want to have these cables go out the back instead. And let's get the front fan installed as well. So this should just pop off. It looks like. Oh, yeah, there it comes. It is on there pretty tight. Okay, so I got the fan installed in the front, and I also replaced this transparent fan here because it has blue LEDs in it, and that won't really go with the rest of the computer, so yeah, I just put an old, what is it, an Arctic cooling fan in there. I didn't really see that the case came with one of those LED fans, so I would have bought an extra of these if I had noticed, but I guess nobody will be able to see this anyway, so. And I forgot to say there's also 2 fans in the top there. So the front 2 fans will be taking air in, and the top ones and this one will be exhausting. So while we're doing all those cables, we might as well get the power supply in there, because we will need that after all. More manuals, zip ties, all your modular cables, power cord, packing foam, silica gel, air dryers, and the power supply itself. Just take a look into that. So I will be installing this power supply with the fan facing down. But you need to be aware that your case must have some ventilation under the bottom. And this case has plenty, so. But you might also consider flipping it if your computer has to stay on a thick carpet or something like that, so don't block the intake. So let's try to get some of these cables where they belong before we get too many of them. So first we have this cable here for the top switches and LEDs. That needs to go here, so we will feed it through this hole here. The USB 3 will have to go here, so we'll feed that through here. The top panel USB and audio also have to be connected, so we'll feed them through also. I think I'll feed them in here. And now let's just get them connected. So the USB will go here, and it will only fit in one way. And likewise with the audio. And to connect up the power button, reset button, HDD LED and the power LED, you can either refer to the manual or you can just look at this adapter if your motherboard comes with one of those. And if you want to connect the system speaker, there's also room for that. You will probably need a SATA cable or more SATA cables, and I will also install a few more later on. And I don't want to use a right angle one. And I almost forgot the USB 3. And we will also need the 24-pin motherboard connector. And there is also an 8-pin power connector for the motherboard, and that needs to plug in up here. So we'll try to get that through this little hole in the corner of the case. We will need some SATA power and also a 4-pin Molex for the fan controller built into the case. So now I feel like installing the CPU cooler. And here it is. So with this cooler it's pretty simple. You just place the back plate and screw 2 brackets into the front. Well, they also give you these plastic spacers to go between the back plate and the front bracket, and they need to be held in place with double-sided tape while you mount the cooler. So Arctic Cooling tells us to remove this plastic and put 1 strip of thermal paste on each of the copper heat pipes. So that is exactly what we'll do. And this is actually not that easy to do behind the camera. And I'll say that mine looks more like the top one than the bottom one. But I guess it will do. Well, this might look like a ridiculous large amount of thermal paste, and it probably is, but you also want to take into account that you have to fill the gap between the pipes here, and it is actually rather large in this one. I probably can't see that. And the last step is to screw it in place. And now it should be sitting fairly firmly in there. And we can put the fan back on. We have to plug in the CPU fan all the way in here. And we will get the SP120 installed, and I of course put on the red ring. And we have a graphics card and a little bag of swag. We don't need that one. Manual, nah. Cables, nah. So what you want to do is to line up the graphics card with the port you want to use, like this one, and check which covers you need to remove on the back. And in my case it's the second and the third. Oh, this feels very cheap. It actually feels like what's remaining here is more likely to break than the actual thing that you're trying to break off. Release the clip and just install the graphics card. If you have room for it for the cables. Snap. And just hold the card in place while tightening the screw. And we will need a PCI Express power cable. So now that's it, actually. I will be installing a few mechanical drives and perhaps an optical drive, but I don't know. Let's see. But there's still one thing left. Oops. We will probably need to deal with this. So I barely managed to get the right side panel on there, and I had to leave this 24-pin cable sticking out in the case a little bit because it simply wouldn't fit behind the motherboard tray. And there's only like 1 or 1.5 centimeter behind the motherboard tray, apart from where these cable management trays go. So apart from that, I think it actually turned out pretty nice. And now would be a very good time to make a little test and see if it actually works. So let's try to turn on the power supply. And we have some red lights on the motherboard, so that looks pretty nice. So let's see if it will boot. And it did. And yeah, well, I already knew because I actually tested it before I routed all the cables. And I also recommend you do that because it's a pain in the ass to do that twice. So, and everything does indeed seem to work. So, yep, we have a winner. So the computer has been running for about a week now, and it seems to be working just fine. And I am quite happy with it. And it was also great fun to build it and share it with you guys. So if you like the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you dislike the video, you can always give it the thumbs down. But please leave a comment telling me what I can do better in my future videos if you don't like it. That will help me a lot. Normally I don't do videos about computers, but you are welcome to check out my other videos, and if you like them, you can always subscribe to my channel. And perhaps I will see you later. And thanks for watching this video.